Well, hello, folks, and welcome to the Dieter Melhorn Fishing Podcast. I hope you're having a good day, whatever day it is that you happen to be listening to the show. If you're a regular listener, welcome back. I appreciate your loyalty and coming back and listening to the show. And if you're new, I appreciate you stopping by and taking the time to listen. I'm on all the popular podcast formats out there, and now this video podcast is being streamed on YouTube. You can actually watch the podcast and watch the interview with today's guest that I have on. I've got a guest today. It's not just me sitting here rambling and jacking my jaws. I've actually got a pretty cool guest we'll get to in a second. But if you're wanting to leave a comment, obviously you can do it on YouTube. My comments are turned back on now, finally. Thank you, YouTube. And you can actually leave comments there, but it's a little bit harder on the podcast. So the easiest thing to do is go to my website, DieterMelhornFishing.com. There's a contact section there where you can click on a link and send me an email or send me a message. That is the best way to give me feedback. Love hearing from you guys. Love hearing what you like, what you don't like, what you're interested in, all that kind of stuff. And there's also links to my YouTube channel on there. My guide business that I do in the Carolinas on the Catawba Channel Lakes, and also the gear. People are always asking about what kind of gear I'm using, what kind of fishing line, what kind of hooks, what kind of reels. I've got a gear section on the website that kind of shows all that stuff. It's got some Amazon affiliate links where you can go order the stuff. So it makes it all very easy. DieterMelhornFishing.com. Go check it out. But today's podcast, I've got a guest. I recently was traveling up to Richmond, Virginia, and decided to make a little detour and sit down with a man that I've heard a lot about, done some reading on. He's a fishing guide up there, a licensed captain on the James River, and his name's John Garland. We call him Big John Garland. He's a great guy. He's a native of that area, and he's fished up there for a good while. I want to thank the folks at Bass Pro Shop in Richmond, Virginia for letting us take over their conference room. And we taped the podcast there in their conference room at the Bass Pro Shop. So thanks to those guys for giving us that opportunity. Everybody in Bass Pro Shop up there knows who John is. They all love him. He's a pro staffer with them. He is also a pro staffer with Catfish Clothing Company, and he's a lovable guy. He's a likable guy. He's somebody that if you ever go fishing and looking for a guide on the James River, it's definitely one I would check out and recommend. He is a real, he's just a man of the game. He loves the sport. He loves everything about it, and I could tell that from sitting down and talking with him in this podcast. I think you're going to like the guy too. So let's get into the podcast with Captain John Garland. Take me back to the beginning. Before it was Big John, there was Little John. You were little at some point.
Right.
Tell me about where you grew up at.
Well, I grew up in Richmond in the West End, and I was a young lad, about 8 or 9 years old, and I would watch the elders come in the evening, and back then they would have fish on a string hanging off their backs. And I didn't know it then, but they were catching the hickory shad and the American shad and the herring doing the spring run on our river here, the James River. And I looked at them in awe with all the fish that they had, because all the women would get excited, like they're bringing food to the community. And I'm like, man, they would look up to me too if I did the same thing. And it always inspired me to provide for my family and for others. And so at that time, being so young, I didn't really have a bicycle, but I listened to the older guys and I was asking questions. I was like Curious George, right? And they said, man, you really want to go fishing, huh? You're not old enough to go down on the river, but you want to go over to the park? And I'm like, over to the park? Yeah, Bird Park, which is a park here in Richmond. And I went over there. I was on the crossbars on a guy's bike riding, and I saw people catching. At that time, they had goldfish in this particular, environment, this pond, and they were catching them with little dough balls. And I'm like, man, I can get some dough and do the same thing. But what I did, Dieter, I took it a little further. once I was able, probably when I was about 11, I had my little bicycle. I got me some little Dixie cups, and had my little twine with my little gold hook and bobber and a can of Pillsbury dough. And I started catching those little goldfish, and I put water in each one of those cups, and I put a goldfish in each cup, and I was selling them for a nickel a piece, right, to the people that were coming by, just visitors, and people, look at those beautiful goldfish. And I had me a little business with my little red rider wagon, just sitting there. And so come evening time, I had enough money, coins in my pocket, and I could get my honey bun or my RC Cola or my knee-high drink and Coca-Cola, and watch my dad play fast pitch softball. And all the other guys, there, John, can I get a swallow of your drink? And I would have to hide because they knew I was a little hustler, and I always had a little money in my pocket or something to eat. But that's how I initially gravitated towards fishing, because it was just the catch of the fish and also making a little money on the side from catching the goldfish. And as I grew up older, we moved to the county. I was a teenager and middle school now, and I was able to go down to the river. And back then, Dieter, it was so clean, the river was so pure, you could see, we didn't have blues in the river back then, but we had channel catch. And from the bridge, the 14th Street Bridge, you could see the channel catch swimming around, but the herring and the shad were in there so thick, they looked like menhaden out there in the river. In the bay, clouds of them just swimming around. And so we could use treble hooks back then, and we could snag them. So I would have a 1 ounce weight on a rod, and I would cast it out. I had old Shakespeare, and I would cast it out and snag these big hickory shad, and I've had my stringer. I'm really feeling myself, as my mom would say. I come home with all these fish, and salted herring was huge back then. So it just grew from there. My interest in being an outdoorsman, providing for my family, fishing, and then I started hunting and stuff like that. But to answer your question, that was the early part of my life, from 9, 10 years old up until my teenage years. And then I started watching TV, Mutual Omaha, and I watched those guys, going all around, flying in these float planes, and Africa. And I'm like, man, this world is huge, man. And because I'd never been out of Virginia other than going to South Carolina where my dad's from, and I'm like, man, I would love to do that.
What you said first thing when you saw those men coming back with those fish, I've said, I know my story of becoming addicted to hunting. I remember my brother and some guys coming back home with some deer that they'd killed. I was 8 or 9. And it was like you were saying, this gathering of people. It's like, it's almost primal, tribal, of people coming in with food from the wild.
Absolutely.
Do you think that, I say that imprinted me in a way that changed me from there on? I didn't know it, but do you think that was the same thing with you, seeing that happen there, with just that bonding you to that?
It was the instinct of it. The association. I'm from a large family. I'm the oldest of 8 kids, but nobody in my family hunted or fished. And when I recognized the connection, food, sustenance, lifestyle, enjoyment, just pure fun, I connected the dots, Dieter, and I never forgot that. I collected Field and Stream magazines, Outdoor Life magazines, anything that I could find associated with fishing. I would go to the library, and it just grew on me. And you know how it is, they say that if you associate yourself with wise people, you become wise. So people that were involved in hunting and fishing, I associated myself with them to gather some knowledge, because there's knowledge in everything. If you fish from a boat or fish from a bank using limb lines, or if they're noodling, there's always something, a technique, throwing a cast net, using a gill net. There's always knowledge somewhere. And I was trying to acquire the knowledge so I could be a better fisherman. And yes, it did affect me early in my life, and it stuck with me. When I was in college, in the biology class, we were dissecting chickens, and we had all these baby chicks left over. And I'm like, man, what are we gonna do with these chickens? I was asking my teacher, instructor, said, well, John, you'd like to have some? I'm like, yes. She said, well, where are you gonna keep them? I told her, don't worry about that. I had them up in my dormitory room in a box.
Now, back up there, back up a second. You fast forwarded to college.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about your basketball prowess. I understand you could play a little bit there.
Yes. I was really known for football early in my life, middle school and high school. And the center on the basketball team had graduated the year before while I was a junior. And Coach Hudson was the basketball coach, and I was playing pickup basketball in the neighborhoods and stuff like that, and he was watching me, and he's like, John, I tell you what, I love the way you jump and you rebound. If you come out and play for me, he said, I think we can do something with you. I'm like, well, Coach, I'm very competitive now. I don't really know how to score that much. He said, your job is just to rebound and block out and block shots. And so I ended up playing basketball that 1 year at Highland Springs High School, of course playing 3 years of football. But anyway, I ended up getting a football scholarship jointly to Florida A&M University down in Tallahassee, Florida. And I played there basketball, yeah, but it was pretty cool. But I'm very competitive, Dieter, I am. I like to, be recognized if I'm going to do something. My wife would tell you, if I do something, I'm all in it. I want to do it the right way. Yeah.
Tell me about your time in Florida and your fishing there. I'm sure you got on the water a little bit.
Yes, I did. When we'd have time away from basketball, after studies and all, we'd go to a place called Lake Jackson in Tallahassee, Florida. And they were known for bass. And we'd go out there and throw frogs, topwater baits, spinner baits, or any type of stick bait or crankbait to catch the bass. But they also had big brim in there too, and I enjoyed catching them. But yes, to answer your question, I fished while I was in college, and we would go to canals, that would bring water in, and I would catch bass in those canals and things. So I was always around some type of where I could, go fishing. I didn't do any hunting when I was in college, but as far as fishing, yeah, I had rods in the dormitory room. So it was just something I was very passionate about.
Yeah. So did fishing stay with you your entire life? Because for a lot of us, I've talked to a lot of people, you'll start out young fishing, and then you'll get to college age. You figure out there's girls in the world, whatever. You go to work, you start your career, and you kind of have this lull where you're not into it. Did you stay fishing the whole time, or
the whole time? Yeah. The whole time. I've never been detached from fishing. If I was detached from fishing, my body, my psychic would let me know I need to reattach myself. It was like getting a fix for me, going fishing. It was therapeutic. Just being waterfront, air, watching birds, wildlife, people. It's just something that's in my DNA that, and I thank God it never departed from me. And that way today, I'm in my 60s now, and I'm very passionate about fishing. Yes.
And before we get to where you are now, what did you do after college? What did you do career-wise, life-wise, that whole world?
Well, I came home after school, and I interviewed for a job down at DuPont. And I didn't think I was going to stay there long, but you know how it is when you come into a job and you get benefits and you get decent pay. I started making investments, buying a house, getting a vehicle, getting married, children.
Playing grown up.
Playing grown up. Yeah, things started, he really evolved, right? Yeah. And so I stayed there, made a career of it, working with DuPont in the Kevlar division. And the whole time I was still fishing. And a buddy of mine became a guide while he was working at DuPont. And he and I fished a lot together. And guys were saying, Big John, look, man, you're doing a lot of fishing, man. And, why don't you just go ahead and try to supplement your income, man? You take somebody else out fishing. And I thought about it, but I'm like, I don't know, that Coast Guard test is pretty hard, man. I don't know. And my mom, she's passed since then, but she said, son, all things are possible to those that believe. All things. I said, yes, ma'am. So I ended up taking the Coast Guard exam with some friends, and I passed it. But I had some anxiety there, but I ended up passing it.
Yeah.
And so I was doing my guide business and working full time too. But I was, fishing on weekends or during the week when I could get some time off. And they came up with a package at DuPont, and I took the package deal. And I focused on my fishing. And
this is a package to leave.
To leave, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're like, yeah, you've been here a while, so we'll give you a package deal. You can do your fishing, and you get your pension and all too. So that's what I did.
Very cool. Very cool. Now, what were you fishing as a guide? Were you just chasing catfish at that point?
Oh, yes,
Okay.
Catfish. But when I started my fishing, I think I told you, I started with the goldfish, and in college, it was bass. But when I started working at DuPont, I was always going down to the river and fishing. And at that time, we had hybrids in the river, and they would come up in the springtime with the shad and all of that. We'd throw red fins and bucktails and sassy shads to catch them. They're very powerful fish, but they would be in there with the stripers, and we'd catch walleye. And that was different for me. And then I gravitated to what they call the old Billy Westmoreland, old guy. You probably don't remember him, but he fished down in Kentucky, right? Dale Hollow Lake. But anyway, Billy Westmoreland would always call them brownfish. I got that book and I started reading it. I was like, smallmouth, man. James River's known for smallmouth. So I started putting two and two together, man, and started catching me live crawfish. And I throw them up in the current, let that bobber bounce back down, and see it go under. Old brown fish come jumping out the water. So that was something I spent some time doing for smallmouth. And then I got into carp fishing because I would see them all around the bank. And the guy said, man, you take sweet corn, Captain, and you throw it out there in the water and just let them come all in, and just put 4 or 5 kernels on your hook and throw that out there in the water. And I put my rod up in a forked stick, right? And yee! And they pull it on over, man. I had a little cowbell on it. But I fished for so many different species, but that catfish is a tug of war for me. I mean, I love a challenge, and I always say, you dance with that big girl. I don't want to take her home. I just want to dance with that big girl, right? And she just pulls so hard. I mean, some of them, the big ones don't fight as hard as the little ones, just like a man. But that blue catfish on the James River has sustained me for the last 30 years. I've been fishing for 30 years.
Now, I understand Gerald Holiday.
Gerald Holiday
introduced you to catfish. Tell me that story, how that came about.
Yes, Gerald Holiday, school teacher. At that time, him and his wife had adopted a little boy, and Gerald and I, we bass fish a lot, right? He was in the bass tournaments and stuff like that. But he had started fishing for catfish, and he was telling me at that time 20 pounds was a citation. And he's like, Big John, you want to catch a catfish, man? You catching them little smallmouth and stuff. You want to catch a big fish. And he showed me a couple in the cooler. I'm like, my God, Gerald, they're big fish, man. He said, I know how to do it. I said, oh, tell me how you do it. He said, what I do, I'll lay the rod down in the reel, into my bass boat, and I back the drag off real, to the point where it won't backlash. And when that catfish hit, I'm watching that reel, and when that line started clicking off of it, he said, I started tightening down on my drag, and we go to war. I'm like, okay. So I jumped in his bass boat with him one day, and it was pouring down rain. And we get up by 295 bridge, and I got my old Penn 320 GTI reel out there, buddy. I'm sitting there, man, looking good, and I had a clicker on mine, so he didn't have no rod holders on Gerald's boat, and I got the clicker on, and at that time he had upgraded his gear, and we sitting there, and he had caught a 30-pound blue catfish right there in front of me. I was in awe when I saw the bubbles come up and it swelled by the boat. I'm I'm like, Gerald, you got a toad on, man. What a big fish. And he started laughing, man. He said, this is my biggest one yet, Big John. He said, what do you think? I said, man, this is awesome. I got quiet because I wanted one, you know. He's like, why don't you look in that cooler, son, and see what a big catfish look like again? I'm like, oh, he rubbing it in there. And all of a sudden, man, after that rain had stopped, I looked at my reel and the line, the spool started turning and it started speeding up. And Gerald said, there he is, Big John, get it. So I click it into gear, tighten up the drag, and the fight's on, right? And that thing came up by the boat, and Gerald looked at me, he said, I think yours is bigger than mine. And I'm like, all right, I was happy, man. It ended up being 33 pounds. Gerald had a 30-pounder. And so we come home, and I was in my garage with my wife, and had some Jack Daniels, so I'm really feeling good. I'm celebrating, right? And I have never killed a catfish since then, but the taxidermist said that, Big John, I could take the whiskers off of your fish and put them on imitation fish, you know, one that's, I guess is a ballast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can make you a mold for your fish, and I have that on my wall. But that was in 1990.
Yeah. And that's important because I was just getting ready to say, for perspective, some people watch it and they'll go, James River, 33-pound fish. But for perspective, that was only about 20 years, 18 years after those fish were introduced here.
Absolutely.
And take me back to that time. Did anybody really know that there were catfish like that? Was anybody even trying to catch them outside of you guys?
It was just a handful of guys doing that. But the Fish and Game Commission put them in as an experiment, just another species of catfish for us to catch, because, like I said earlier, the predominant fish was the channel cat. But that blue was growing and reproducing at such an amazing rate. That was quite a time. Those were glory days when you can go out and catch you 4 or 5 big fish a day. Now with the commercial fishing, and you know, I guess you would have to put in the pollution, and also with the technology and just the sheer pressure of people fishing every day, you know, the growth rate, and also those bigger fish are harder and harder to come by.
Well, take me through this timeline. Those fish were introduced in 72 from what I read.
Yeah, that's correct.
You're catching these fish that are in the 30s, in 1990, early 90s, late 80s, that time frame.
Right.
What was the next 10 years like on the James River, all the way up through 2000, as far as what you were seeing growth-wise, numbers-wise? Paint that picture.
Oh, that was an amazing time. That was just an amazing time. I mean, you could go out. It didn't look like Christmas at night when you went out at night back then, during that 10-year span from 1990 to 2000. And you could get up on the flats, you could fish wrecks, or you could fish the channel edges and all, and just catch catfish. I mean, it was just, you had slime all over the boat, on your clothing. It was just a great harvest time, and it was such a nice nucleus of guys that were actually out there, old timers. We are old timers now, and it's good to see familiar faces from back we call the glory days. Yeah, but yeah, even if the marine biologists will tell you that the growth rate during that period was it was incredible for those blue catfish. And in fact, we didn't even use a gill net back then. I threw a cast net some days, especially during the wintertime when it was hard to catch because of cold water. If you didn't have a warm water discharge, I'd throw that cast net all day just to catch 2 or 3 shad. But I knew if I got that fresh bait, my success rate went out the roof versus going and buying store-bought bait. But yeah, that was an amazing time. And I tell these young guns today, and they're like, yeah, I heard about those glory days, Big John. I said, yeah, I was a part of it, man. I really enjoyed that. God wanted me to experience that. Yeah. You know, they said some things just don't last forever. But
and that's true. There's the country song right now, Luke Combs, about things don't last forever.
Yeah.
What was the turning point? What started to change? What happened there? What's your theory on what happened? What all came together? From my understanding, it was kind of a little perfect storm of a lot of stuff between water quality and DNR and management and blue crab people not like them. Take us through that as what sort of happened from 2000 on.
Well, a lot of the bass fishermen were complaining that the blue cats were actually consuming the bass. And every time they would catch one, they would kill it, right? They throw it up on the bank, trash fish, commercial fishing, trot lines, hoop nets, mercury, PCBs, keepone. We had a big keepone spill from Honeywell back then, pollution. Unfortunately, like John Denver say, more people on the land, you get more scars. And when you get scars on the land, they end up in our waterways, and that affected the fishing. A combination of all of that. And then the technology. Back then we had papergraphs. Now, you've got, you got Fish Live, and you got so much, you can actually target these fish. There's a lot of pressure out there. The commercial fishing, I talked to a marine biologist now that you mentioned it 2 weeks ago, and I was saying, do you think we can get a state record out the James River, or world record out the James River? I know we got some 3-digit fish in the river. He said, Captain John, I think your chances are over with on the river. He said, but there's a chance there's a 150-pound fish in Bugs Island, Lake Gas, and Kerr Lake, because you don't have the commercial fishing, right? You don't have the pollution, right? Yep, so, but he said there's a chance you could catch you a good 80, 90-pound fish, but, the percentage is low now. Yeah, and I'm not the only guy that'll tell you that. Guys I talk to on a regular basis, it's hard to dance with those big fish. 2 summers ago, I had a kid in the boat, his birthday, 13 years of age. We were fishing a secondary channel, old tree, and I was hung up in the tree. And I told him, I said, I'm gonna use that line as an anchor line. And his brother caught a fish about 63 pounds, and he was stoked. And it was his birthday fish. But his older brother, 23 years old, I kept giving that fish a little line, and you see the rod bounce, bounce, bounce. And I kept fooling with it, and all of a sudden, Dieter, that rod sprung down to the water. And he couldn't get it out of the rod holder. So I said, son, let me get it for you. So I get it out the rod holder, and I'm like, you got a good one on here. And I give it to him, and he fought that fish for about 12 minutes. And I could just see it in his eyes. He was sinking. He was sinking. I said, son, if you pass me the rod, that's a big fish we got behind the boat. I said, he dwarfs your brother's fish. A tail's like that. I know she was good 90 to 100, easy. And his dad blurted out there from Tennessee, Captain John, he's a grown man. Let him continue to fight this fish. And he looks at me, and I could tell he was wearied in, Dieter. And so I said, son, you can do this. You can do this. And then I'm looking at his hands, and he's shaking. And his arms go out like that. That fish rolls up, boop, and that hook pops out, and the air bubbles, and the fish tails on off. I fell back in the boat, and it was like church in my boat, man, quiet. And all of a sudden I heard his wife say to him, to her husband, you should have listened to the captain. And the captain, I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, that would have done a whole lot of good for my business and also, for my sponsors. And his dad says, is that the biggest catfish you've ever had by your boat? I said, yes, sir. He said, how big you think it? I said, that fish was, he's in the 90 to 100-pound range, easy, easy, easy. The kid sat next to his mom, and he kept rubbing his arm. And his mom said, are you all right, son? He said, Mom, that big catfish kicked my ass. And I think about that today, and I know you've danced with some big fish, man, but that's etched in my mind. And that's one of the reasons I keep going back to the river, because, and I told him, I said, guys, that was like hitting the lottery right there with that big fish right there. I said, the line didn't break, the hook wasn't straightened out. I said, but there was too much fish and not enough man.
Yeah.
That's what I told him.
Yeah. What's a reasonable expectation on the river now as far as, I mean, obviously, as a fishing guide, everything we show is the highlight reel, on our pages. It's the highlight reel. Everybody has bad days, I'm sure I've heard stories. There are bad days up here that people have.
Oh, man.
What's on the James, you come up here, what's a reasonable expectation? And I say this because I had somebody the other day contact me about doing a guide trip where I'm at, and they said, I want to catch big fish. And I said, well, what's your idea of a big fish? And they're talking 40, 50-pound fish. And I was honest with them. I said, hey, listen, that's not a reasonable expectation on our fishery. I actually sent them to you. I don't know if the guy ever called you, but I said, that's not a reasonable expectation where I fish. And he said, I appreciate your honesty. I said, for us, if you get 30-pound fish, I mean, we got 40, 50, 60-pound fish there, but to reasonably expect, it's asking a little much. What's reasonable over here as far as what you can expect to catch and what you may catch on a good day?
Reasonable to me, I always ask my crew, what is your personal best? And, they say, well, Captain John, I've never caught a fish over 10 pounds. I'm feeling good now, right? But reasonable, if you can come out and catch one citation, I think you've had a good day. And
tell everybody what a citation is in Virginia.
A citation is a 30-pound fish or a 38-inch catfish, right? Whichever, comes first. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and that's a good day. Very cool. Now, how has that changed in the past 15, 20 years as far as that expectation? Has that about the same as it's always been, or 15 years ago, would you expect something more than that?
As far as numbers are concerned, 15 years ago, I would expect more numbers. It was you can go out and catch 4, 5, 6 citation fish. For a while there, 5 years ago, we were like, maybe the Fish and Game Commission needs to raise it, make it maybe 40, 42 inches or 40 pounds. And hopefully, because to a novice, if they catch a 30-pound fish, they might kill that fish. You see, they ride around with it in the back of their truck, end up in the landfill or something like that. And I know those bigger fish don't necessarily taste as good. In fact, the guys at the fish companies, when we go to the VMRC meetings, they would say they want fish between 8 and 10 pounds for their fishery, and that's the meat that they want to harvest. Yeah. But I really do think that those fish, a reasonable fish now is one citation. If you get 2, you've had a good day. Yeah. Main thing, if I can leave, I always say a happy crew is a happy captain. All I can do from my vantage point is put them in an area that I feel good about, and I let them look at my electronics, what I'm seeing, and just being positive, just think, so like we can get this fish to bite, and being patient. As you know, we've had an excruciating hot summer, and a lot of people didn't really want to just sit there for an hour, 2 hours and fish, and I get that. So I would pull up the anchor and we'd ride to another location, but it seems like those big fish, I always tell people this, something to remember. We got a tidal river here, 6-hour tide. 6 hours coming in, 6 hours going out. But those first 2 hours of either tide, when I've experienced, I get a bigger bite. And I've come to the knowledge that those big fish do not like to fight that stiff, heavy, fast current. They like that slower moving water. So those first 2 hours, the tide is not coming in as hard or going out as hard. It's more, that's when my feelings of a big bite is going to occur. And it's happened more times than not.
Break down the tide. There's going to be some people in the Midwest, wherever, they don't know what we're talking about when we talk about tide.
Right.
Explain that cycle in layman's terms, how that works on that roughly 6-hour schedule.
Okay, all right. Well, everything's affected. We have the ocean, the bay, and of course we have the river. And then we have the moon, right? They're all connected. But that tide, that gravitational pull, is actually pulling that water from out the river back into the bay and back into the Atlantic Ocean, the bay being the Chesapeake Bay. And then when it fills, right, like the Bible say, all rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full, from whence the rivers come, thither they return again, right? So they come back in 6 hours later. They come right back in real fast, right? Now, unless you got high water, like flood, it could be very slow in moving, going out, and very slow coming back in. And the gravitational pull from the moon will actually make it very, very low, and it can, in some cases, make it very, very high. And that affects the tide also.
Yep. And there's a sweet spot in that window, because basically, to break it down even further, the water flows downstream like you're used to, and then it slows down and comes to a stop, and it flows the other way down here. Little different than you get on the Mississippi River, at least the upper part. Tell me about that sweet spot in that whole ebb and flow of when the fish are biting.
Yes, and that's to be determined by the fisherman itself, but I think that sweet spot for me is those 2 hours I was telling you about. Coming in, the first 2 hours when things are just starting to come back in, right? And the things are just starting to go back out. Within that 2 hour window, you mentioned sweet spot, that would be my sweet spot, those 2 hours. I love that. Yes, sir. And then once we get what is called a flat tide or a dead tide, I know some people who don't want to even move, because at that point, everything's at a standstill. And I've learned that catfish do not like a challenge. In other words, that big catfish will kill anything that's around it, right? But when that tide is nil, not moving, and all of a sudden it just starts to move a little bit, move that bait another way, he'll hit it. A reaction bite. Get it. Yep.
Now, obviously we're dealing with the ocean here. The ocean is influencing this.
Yes.
How does salinity play a part as far as where the fish are? How much will they tolerate? Yeah. I mean, are we catching them in the Chesapeake Bay? I mean, what's kind of how does salinity play?
Well, that's a good question, Dieter. Right now, because of lack of rain, we're getting some now, but we have blue crabs that are in our river. And also, we saw dolphin down by the Chickahominy the other night. They're coming in, and I've talked to marine biologists, and what they're telling me is that, the influx of salt because of lack of water when the tide comes in is pushing those saltwater fish, the croakers and the spot, right, along with the crabs. And now I'm seeing dolphin come into the lower James River. Now, not where it's fresh, up there by the fall line. The fall line is where the tide doesn't go any further because of the dam and all of that. But the lower reaches of the river, the salinity is a whole lot higher because the bay, you're down by Jamestown, Williamsburg, that salt water is prevalent.
Yeah. Yeah. And for people that don't know, what would happen is if you've got a lot of rain, you've got a lot of, that's fresh water. Yeah. It's flowing out of these rivers. It's going to push that fresh water further down. Yeah. And then when you have drought, low water, that salt's going to push back in on that incoming tide.
Yeah. And people always ask me, they say, well, Captain John, if you see dolphin, do you think bull sharks can come up into our rivers? I say, yes, I do. And it bothers me because I see kids frolicking in the water and stuff. And God forbid if I heard one of them scream or something like that, but nature is something, we have to contend with all the time. And that salinity, and also, because of the food source, they're going to follow the food. So yes, to answer your question, that salt. And those catfish, they seem to adapt. They're freshwater fish, but they can deal with salt, but not just pure salt. A part salt, part water combination. Now, I don't know what percentage, but they can stay down in that area for a while because we catch them down there. Yes.
Yeah. That's the thing. We see them Winyah Bay area, South Carolina, or Georgetown. Three rivers come in there. They all got catfish, flatheads, and blues, and it's amazing how far down into the bay you can catch blues, especially. They seem to be way more tolerant of it than what the flatheads are. It's interesting you mentioned bull sharks. because those things will swim all the way up until they hit the rocks at Richmond. I mean, they can live in fresh water, which is really crazy. But my son's thing, every time we're at the beach, he'll see somebody on the beach and they'll say something about sharks, and he's like, "You know how to test if there's sharks in the water, don't you?" And they'll say, "No." He'll say, "Stick your finger in the water. And I taste your fingers. Is it salty?" And they go, "Yeah, there's sharks in there." He said there's any salt taste to it. And to a large extent, that's kind of true there. You mentioned blue crabs.
Yes, sir.
Let's go back to the whole thing here and that's a whole nother world that people that fish for catfish. This is one of the beautiful things about the dynamic of the James River. It's unlike any other fishery, and all this stuff that all the stakeholders have that comes into play here. The blue crabs, and it's a big commercial fishery for that, and it led to a whole bunch of stuff with electrofishing, commercial harvesting. Tell the story of how that came into play and everything behind that.
Well, we were just talking about the salinity, right? And right now we've got miles and miles of crab pots in the James River. The commercial guys have moved closer to our fishing grounds because they know that the blue crabs are there. And because of lack of rain, and they're just tracking these blue crabs. They call them jimmies, the bigger ones. And when you're night fishing, you actually can see them on the surface swimming around. Yeah, it's that many crabs in the river. And I know the fish will eat those crabs because we've had them regurgitate crabs, or you could see a claw or something hanging out of, the fish's bottom. I don't remember being say 20 years ago, this number of crabs being in the James River. But here again, in all fairness, I haven't been going down river that far either, because normally I made my mark in the upper reaches of the river, back in the early 2000s, between say 1990 to 2010.
Yeah.
And then 6 years ago, I started venturing further downriver. I had gone downriver prior to that, but it's just so vast, so big, so wide, and it's just so much to fish, and it was overwhelming for me at that time. And then I started, here again, surrounding myself with people that fished the lower James, and I started acquiring more knowledge and getting my confidence up.
Yeah.
Yes.
And is that where more of the encounter, I call it an encounter between the commercial saltwater crab guys and the blue catfish started to happen on those lower reaches down there? And
Absolutely.
Stuff. So,
yes.
Now, I know they introduced electrofishing. They allowed, I think, a couple of boats or one boat.
Yeah, we got one boat right now.
And is that still going on? What was tell everybody the reason behind that and what they were trying to hit, the balance they were trying to hit.
The VMRC says that the James River has too much biomass. In other words, we have an abundance of small catfish, and they were just overwhelming the river system, and they needed to get them out of there. They wanted to, quote unquote, protect the trophy fishery, but get the biomass out. So they had a lottery system for these gentlemen, commercial guys, to put their name in the hat to get the equipment, and they can get so many tons of catfish out of the river a week. They came up with a solution where they can keep them all the way up to 26 inches, okay? And but they can't do it on weekends, and it only affects them when the water temperature gets around. Effectively fishing, I think, right around 50 degrees. And in the salt water, the electroshocking doesn't really affect the catfishing. But say between the Chickahominy and the Benjamin Harrison Bridge down by Hopewell, that's where they do a lot of electroshocking. I haven't personally seen that this year, but I have seen it in the past. Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting the way they put it in play. One of the things I read was they thought there would be more people trying to do it, but apparently, like you were saying, it's kind of a pain in the butt to do it, and the cost of doing it, and then there's a very small sweet spot for those guys commercially to make that work.
Absolutely, and to do it the right way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Let's talk about technology. You mentioned that earlier. That's, in my opinion, going to be one of the interesting things the next 10 years. With, I've said the biggest advance we've had in fishing in the past decade has been the mapping that Navionics and other people put out. That has been a true game changer, I think, in fishing, because it makes understanding what's there so much easier. Where we used to have to sit there, I used to tell people, I need to do a video on it, reading the bank. If you got a steep bank coming down, you're probably gonna have steep drop off going in there. You got a bluff, it's probably gonna drop off. You got something that's swampy, it's probably gonna be a flat. Now you can look at a map, and I can sit here and I can do my pre-fishing. I can narrow it down to 5 or 6 places down here, and I've never been on the water before in my life. And that's just with the mapping, and that's almost old school now. Now we're in the live scope and all this.
Which I'm not in that ballpark just yet.
Is this good? Is this bad? Is this where's our line at and all this stuff? Give me your philosophical waxing on this for a few minutes on just what do you think about all this stuff, and is it good or bad?
Well, I'm old school, and we always said that a man or a woman, they should pay their dues, right? But like you just mentioned, you can actually pull up the James River on your unit and take your cursor and just take a ride. Find out where the stakes are, find out where the underwater bridges are, find out where the wrecks are, and just hit a waypoint. And once you get to the boat ramp, you just bring it up and just ride on over there and fish.
And they're usually pretty good places.
And that's exactly right. Because why? Catfish is a predator, right? And he's a mugger. He hides behind things to rest, but also knowing that the current will wash him a meal. All he got to do is step out the alley and hit him with a baseball bat and go on back up in the alley. Opportunists. Yep, they get up in these old submerged barges and things like that, log jams, rock piles, old cars under the water, and that's their home, that's their doghouse. And if you can find that on your GPS, that's a great place to start. Yeah. But technology has really changed the game. It will never go backwards. It's just going to get, more and more technical with the trolling motors, the live scope. It's amazing. I was in a buddy of mine's boat. He has it on the front and the back, and you can actually see the striped bass. You can see the catfish. You can see the schools of shad swimming by your unit. And it's just like looking at TV. And I marvel at that. And I'm like, man, this is amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I shot some stuff with Melton Hill Bill, Captain Billy Davis out in Tennessee, and he was fishing with skipjack. And he could point that transducer on that live scope over to a wall and throw that skipjack. You see the skipjack hit, and then you would see fish come up. Now, whether they were stripers, whether they were catfish, whatever they were, but you'd see the fish swim up off the bottom to where the skipjack was and swim around it, and then it'd go back down. And it's just amazing that now one day, I really believe you're going to be able to go, that's an 18-pound striper, and that's a flathead. I think the technology is going to get better and better to where you can literally, now it's just a fishy kind of
right.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, and I'm interested in how it's going to play into, you still got to know how to fish. You still got to know where to fish. But it does seem to help flatten the learning curve a little
Absolutely.
bit.
And I always say you can find them, but you can't necessarily make them bite. But you want to be in the area where the fish are.
Yeah. That's one of the most frustrating things in the world when you're sitting there staring at fish, staring at good fish, and it just ain't the time. It just ain't the right time. Now, what about the technology of Facebook, the internet? That's another technology thing there. On one hand, it brings people together. It's a great place to share information. It's the whole reason I'm sitting here taping this with you right now is because of podcasts and YouTube technology. At the same time, I can be cussed at for showing people too much. I've heard that before. They're looking at your spot where you're fishing, which is arguable there whether they're actually looking at the right spot. What do you think about all that, especially social media technology? What's your thoughts on all that?
I think personally it can be good and it can be bad, right? Because I've been on some of the forums and the personal attacks and things like that, and that turns me off. But from an educational standpoint, it's a very good tool, connecting the dots. You know, somebody say in Texas wanting to come here, and they're communicating with one of the guys here on the river, and asking questions like you asking me questions here, and to bring us together.
So yeah, I can be accused of it being bad, leading to that. Where's that balance in all of this, the good and the bad?
I try to keep it clean. I get on social media, post pictures, thank my crew for coming out fishing with me, and also create visibility for myself because, it's my lifestyle, right? I'm trying to make supplement my income by fishing as a guide, and also meeting people, friending people on Facebook that I've met along the way. But like I said, the bickering and personal attacks and all that bothers me a lot. Because people be hiding behind the computer versus talking to you man to man and trying to iron out our differences. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I guess that's the thing. Guides get beat up on it a lot. You got two different schools of guy. I listen to a lot of podcasts and they talk about this topic. You got some that are very secretive, and I mean they're blacking out backgrounds. They hardly ever post anything, and then some of them are showing every single thing. It's a great way for us to market our guide business, but it's also a good way to burn holes, as they say, and it's kind of a balance you got to find there with what you're doing.
Now, where you're fishing, Dieter, you're probably dealing with the same thing as far as fishing holes are concerned. You can really get into a big disagreement with someone or argument or an attack over a fishing hole. And I always tell people, I said, man, everybody, if you got GPS, you got Google Maps, people get in your boat, you might not even be aware of it.
They'll be on the phone.
Yeah,
wait for it.
I'm like, man, you're on your phone, and now some of the guys are, they cut the depth finders off and stuff like that, but, you can't tell a man to cut his phone off, but they're marking places where you're fishing. And I've heard a few of the guys say, hey, man, I saw a guy in my hole the other day, man, and he wouldn't even be over there if so-and-so hadn't told him. And I don't know if so-and-so told that person or not, but it creates tension, man. It creates tension. And I'm like, man, everybody's got the right to fish, man. And I know with these blues, you might catch them in the area on Monday, but when you go back Thursday, they're not there, So you just have to put in your time and try to fish. But holes are sacred, man. I'm telling you, if you want to have a disagreement with somebody, they take you out fishing, they'll tell you, man. I had one guy told me, say, Big John, I'm going to take you to a spot, man, but I'm going to have to put a blindfold on you. I'm serious. And I'm like, are you serious? He said, no, man, I really don't want you to see what I'm doing. And I'm like, this is ridiculous, man.
I've said this, because I'll get something from people. I'll have some guy to watch the video. Well, I'm going to tell you about a secret place. And then he'll describe it to me. And I can almost tell you what's laying on the bottom right there because I've fished it. Are there any secret places left? I mean, the lake I fish on is 100 years old, okay?
Wow.
Yeah, it's turned 100 in 2016. So it's been fished a long time. Obviously not as many people, but are there any secret spots really left, or is it just a secret because you hadn't heard about it yet?
Right. You found a spot where the fish were biting. Right, and you slayed them in that area, and that could be an area 400 or 500 yards in diameter, but you're in that area where the fish are. And but to answer your question, as far as secret spots, there are a lot of spots on that river, but I'm quite sure, People have hit them before. If you could go underwater with your camera and everything, you see fishing line and everything down there, right? They've been hit before. Yeah.
All right, let's fast forward to now. Your guide business, Screaming Real Charters.
Yes.
Tell me how that started, and when you alluded to it a little bit earlier, when you decided I'm finally going to do this, I'm going to go take the captain's test and get my captain's license and do this.
Right. A buddy of mine, he had been fishing the river a long time. Huey Self is his name. Hugh's Blues, Huey's Catfishing.
Hugh Self, Captain Hugh Self.
Captain Hugh Self, yep. He worked at DuPont with me at that time, and he went on to get his captain's license, and he did very well. I mean, he stayed busy, and here again, he retired early, and he had a few problems with disability and all of that, but he's one heck of a fisherman. I learned a lot fishing with him over the years, and when he got his captain's license, it was intriguing to me to do the same thing, because I would go out and catch bait with him, and when he didn't have a trip, we'd fish together and things like that, but the seed was planted, you ought to consider it, which I did, and I did the same thing. I followed, his footsteps, if you will. I'll have to give him credit for that. Yeah. A real good guy, hardcore fisherman. He's one of those guys you get on the river and fish with. You tired, Big John? No, I'm not tired. You tired here? I'm not tired. Might be snoring, but we still out there in the boat together, right? And there wasn't no time when you go home. You fish from daylight to nighttime and back to daylight if necessary, but just being out on the water together, man, those were some great times, man, great times. Yeah. So.
Now, obviously, there's something, and I know you won't admit it, there's something a little special about you because you have a good association with Bass Pro Shops, Catfish Clothing. You're going to be speaking at the Catfish Conference. Steve Douglas reached out to you about that. What is that magic? I know it's going to be hard to get you to brag on yourself at all, but what do you think it is that, if nothing else, somebody else looking to follow in your footsteps could do? People like you.
Treating people the way you would want to be treated. Giving people your best. People can tell when you are not sincere, when you're just out there trying to make a hustle and take their money and get them back to the dock. When they step in my boat, I'm going to give them the best I can be. Be truthful with them, don't BS them, and just say, hey guys, we're going to put work in, we're going to work as a team. I always ask people, have you ever operated a boat before? If I'm putting a gill net out, I want you to put my boat in reverse for me. Could you help me out? Most people are more than willing to give you a helping hand. Just make them feel a part of that trip, right? And telling stories in the boat and just sharing food and sharing laughs. I always tell people, and I'm sincere about this, Dieter, it's not a skin thing with people because we got all these social justice things going on right now, injustice, if you will. It's a sin thing. It's not a skin thing because there's good in all people. And when you step in my boat, I don't care if you're red, yellow, black, or brown, white, I'm going to give you the same treatment that I give everybody else because you're a child of the King. You're a child of God. And it's all about love, man. And if I can be remembered for that, just giving people the very best, being a good neighbor, like I alluded to earlier, that carries on a long way in my heart. And then catching fish on the side. That's just spice on the cake, buddy.
Yeah. Where did you get these values from? Is this from family? Is this from church? Is this from your wife beat it into you and reformed you? Where did you get these values instilled in?
From home, from my mom and dad, God-fearing folks.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. My dad always says, son, God chastised those that they love. I love you. I'm going to chastise you too. Yeah. I was held accountable. Yeah. You told the truth. You did the right thing. If you didn't, you know what happened, right? It wasn't good.
Yeah. What would they think about where you're at now?
My mother, she died in '08, and I miss her dearly. I know she's proud of me because back then I was taking the captain's course, and she would always tell me to be careful. But like I told you earlier, she said all things are possible to those that could believe. And I passed that captain's course. And I know my dad is proud of me, the magazine articles, the interviews, the pictures that he sees and things like that. And then, it's how people refer you to other people, their experience, right? I might not be the very best fisherman that day, but I'm on that river with you, or on that lake with you that day, and I'm gonna give it a good shot, buddy. And then, every dog has his day, but I know they're proud of what I've done, how far I've come, in this industry. And I like to think that I've been an asset, to the catfish, because we started out, it was very, you had a John boat, you had a 10, 15 horsepower motor, you threw a cast net and stuff like that. But the industry now, they got over $100,000 boats, 300 horsepower, 350 horsepower motors, and stuff like that. It's just how much money you're willing to spend. The catfishermen have really stepped up their game, really. The rod manufacturers, I think everybody has benefited. You've benefited, I've benefited, but if you take care of something, it will take care of you. And I think if everybody could just work together as a community, this industry will continue to grow. But if you're ratting and beating and cheating, those things, I always say the evil that you do, it comes back to you. So if you give a person a good, honest day's work, you get a good, honest day's pay, in my opinion. But I've always been humble, Dieter. Never had a big head. I don't care if you from the White House or from the poorhouse, I'm gonna relate to you. I'm telling you, I always try to find that common ground where we can talk, right?
There you go, folks. This is not going to be my last interaction with him, I promise. I want to get back up there, and I'd like to film something with him a little more in depth, and get out and just get out on the boat with him. I think there's so much more he has to offer. This was a long podcast. This thing is going to be over an hour long, so I apologize for that, but it was so much fun talking to him, and just getting a feel for his love of the sport, his love of fishing, his love of life, family, God, everything. And I really enjoyed it. And I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Until next time, we'll catch you out on the water.